This is Food for Thought with Deborah Walker. Hi everyone and welcome to Food for Thought. This week I'm talking to Linda Belcher, who's over in the Sussex area in the UK, and we're going to talk about kinesiology, one of my interests, and I don't actually know a huge amount about it, but I have had it from a few practitioners in the past, so I'm really curious to understand a lot more today. Hi Linda, how are you?
Hi, I'm really well, thank you. I've had a bit of a frustrating morning because I got up early to just clear up some admin, and the joys of technology, it took me about 45 minutes instead of the 5 minutes that it should have done, but it's done, so hopefully behind me.
That's admin for you, isn't it? It just seems to be like a woman's handbag, I find. It just seems to grow.
I know, and the best intentions, I thought I'm going to be really organised, I'm going to get it all done before, the interview, and it just sometimes, it's just so frustrating. It's a case of one button, it's so simple, but it just sometimes you just want to throw it out the window.
Could you not done some kinesiology on yourself to calm that down and to change that?
Well, yeah, people say that there is a temptation. You feel you have to be perfect and you can't really admit to any of your imperfections or frustrations, or you feel like you have to be a walking not a zombie, but a walking advertisement for Zen. But we are human, aren't we?
This is it. I always fear when someone says to me, how are you feeling? And I always feel like I have to say, I feel absolutely great all the time.
You can't say I've got a terrible cold and I haven't been taking my vitamins.
Yeah, and when I did once say, I had to cancel some clients about 4 or 5 weeks ago because I picked up a chest infection, and when I actually said to a couple of my clients, I'm not very well, and they were like, you're not well, you're not well. I said, yeah, sometimes I'm not well. Felt ever so guilty about that moment, I have to say.
I know.
So tell us a little bit of background about yourself, Linda, and how you got into kinesiology, because I know when I was at school, it wasn't a career path that we were told about, in all honesty. No, and yeah, ditto here, and that's probably further away for me than it is for you as well. I mean, my career path really was, I went into an office as an office junior and considered that I was working through the ranks to become a secretary and PA, which I loved, I have to say, I'm not knocking it. But I found my way into human resources, and I was doing a lot of travelling throughout the UK, probably about 30,000 miles a year travelling. I was very stressed, although I thoroughly loved it. I probably thrived on, or I thought I was thriving on the stress. And then circumstances intervened. I had a really dreadful year back in 2005, what with one thing and another, lots of personal events, and it culminated with redundancy. So as shocking and upsetting as it was, I decided that I'd like to take some time out because I was the stress had been impacting on my health, and I'd had some kinesiology treatments. Obviously I'd never heard of it before either. And I think probably what had happened in a very rare lunch hour, walking up and down Epsom High Street, somebody probably gave me a leaflet or I picked something up, which in those days you could advertise as you wished and list all sorts of ailments and list all the things you could do for people. And I just went down the list. It probably, I can't remember exactly, but it probably said, are you stressed? Are you this? Are you that? Do you have that? And I just went down the list ticking them all. And thought I could really do with whatever this therapy is. This sounds marvellous. And like everything else, it probably sat in a drawer until there was a crunch time, and I thought I really have got to go and have, experience what this can offer me. I'd always been interested in complementary treatments. So anyway, I went and had a few sessions, and I have to say it was absolutely marvellous. And I said to her one day, it must be so lovely having this job where you're making people feel great and you're making people feel better, and they come in frazzled and they leave floating. And she laughed and said, yes, it is. It's absolutely one of the best things about it. And I just said, do you ever teach this stuff? And again, she gave me a leaflet, which she said, oh, yes, we run courses in school and everything else. And I thought, oh, yeah, interesting, but I haven't got time for that. So again, the drawer was filling up. And again, when I was contemplating what to do after being made redundant, again, I sort of came across this leaflet, and I was leaving my job in the December, and the foundation course was starting in the January, and it was almost like it was meant to be. Like we were talking about synchronicity earlier, or I think maybe you just take advantage of your opportunities and you see them differently, whereas before you're a bit blinkered and you don't see the opportunities that are there. So I just thought, well, I'm going to have 4 months off, and I did. And the foundation course that I took was over 4 weekends, over 4 months. And I had no intention of becoming a professional practitioner. I just did it purely for my own interest, which I say to my students now, I actually think that's the best reason of all to learn anything, is for your own self-development, with no necessary plan of action, how you're going to use it. I was just fascinated by it, and I did it for myself, which is what I needed at the time. And then I continued to do some interim HR work and some consultancy work. And then one day another letter dropped through the post. I hadn't even done the homework and the case studies required to get the certificate. I had no intention of using it at all. And then there was a follow-up course, and that just reinvigorated my interest. So I had to rush to, get all my case studies and homework through in the required timescale, and which was, quite a challenge. But I just was so reinvigorated. I think it's confidence. You follow a particular path in an office or whatever else, and you can't necessarily see yourself doing anything else because that's what we're conditioned to think. And I just thought, I'm really going to do this. So for a while I tried to work alongside my HR activities. But then the day came and I thought, actually, I'm just going to go for this 100% and put all efforts into it. So that's what I did. And then I learned how to teach it, and I run the foundation courses myself now. So it's really taken on. And I suppose it was just because I didn't seek it out. It just came to me, I suppose. That sounds a bit grand, doesn't it? But that's what happened.
It's almost been an evolving journey for you.
Yeah. We're all evolving, aren't we?
Yeah.
If you just sort of keep your eyes open. And obviously that's led on to other things and other modalities. But my main modality, that is my main sort of mainstay, if you like, is systematic kinesiology.
And just explain for me, because there's different schools of kinesiology, I've noticed. What are the differences between them? So can you explain what systematic is as opposed to the others?
Yeah, I suppose the main they all use the muscle test. The key tool of any kinesiologist is the muscle test. Within systematic kinesiology, each muscle that we test relates to an organ and an energy pathway, a meridian circuit. It was discovered and developed in 1964 by an American chiropractor called Dr. George Goodhart, who began to realise the implications of weak muscles, or the implications of physical stress that he was treating on the rest of the body, and mapped out the muscles together with the organ and the Chinese meridian circuits. So it became a synergy of east and west. And what we do in systematic kinesiology is test the muscles to find out which one can resist the pressure, because the whole function of a muscle is to fire and to resist pressure. And if the muscle can't resist that pressure, it's what we call weak or spongy. Because the muscle should be able to maintain that strength and that pressure, we need to look to find out what will help to strengthen it and correct it. So we're not asking for a yes or a no answer. We're just literally seeing, is it strong or is it not? And then if it's not strong, what we can do is place things, what we call in the circuit or on the body. So, for example, we can put nutrition there, or ask somebody to think about an emotion, or we can place food or substance on the body to see whether it changes the muscle response. and we're using the muscle response as an on-off, if you like, the whole time to see whether the stressors that we place on the body or the things that we hope will help will actually change the muscle response to see whether it's, in inverted commas, good or bad for that particular individual. So within systematic kinesiology, we're always looking to treat somebody completely holistically. It's the most holistic treatment I am aware of. I use the word treatment rather than therapy because I don't like the word therapy or therapist. We're always looking for the whole. We're always looking at the whole person rather than just the symptoms. So we use the letters MCPE. So the M is mental, or I prefer emotional. The C is chemical, which can cover food, drink, anything basically that goes in the mouth or on the body, skin products as well. P is for the physical or the structural, so it could be an injury, it could be a weak or a strained muscle, it could be somebody's fallen over, it's the actual physical side. And the final E is for the more electromagnetic, so that's where the meridians come in. And I suppose the subtle energies that you can't necessarily see, we can look at chakra energy if people are open to that. So we're always looking at that whole, the four realms to balance somebody completely. And there's never just one reason why somebody is unwell or displaying dis-ease. There generally are a combination of reasons that somebody has reached the point that they've reached, because the body will always do its very best to support you. So, you know, somebody may come in with a stiff neck, but actually the problem's originated either from the hips, or there could be an emotional component of the fact they've got a stiff neck. There's always plenty of reasons going on. And within systematic kinesiology, we're looking for changes to the muscle response to tell us what's been going on. And if a muscle, for example, connected to the liver is weak, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the liver. So it's always quite important to stress to people or to students or clients that just because that muscle relates to that particular way, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with the organ, but we're looking at the energy circuit, which for some people is, you know, a bit of a leap of the imagination. So that's the systematic kinesiology. I can compare that specifically to health kinesiology, which it still uses the muscle test, but they stick to using one muscle as an indicator and ask the body questions. So a little, I suppose an easy analogy is to think of dowsing, where you're asking for a yes response and a no response to the muscle. And then you feel the difference in the muscle as to whether it's a yes or whether it's no. And then you proceed to ask a range of questions that require a yes-no answer. So is it this, is it that? As opposed to us, where we place the stress within the body and then just test the muscle response, if that makes sense to you.
It does.
And I'm trained in systematic kinesiology, and that's what I do. And the health kinesiologists do what they do and get equally great results. So I think there's plenty of different ways to complete a jigsaw. And there's no one treatment or therapy that is the answer to everything.
I know.
Otherwise, we'd be rich, wouldn't we? You know, there's just different approaches that work for people, and but they are very different in their approach. And sometimes I do have clients come to me for a treatment who've been having health kinesiology, and either they like my approach or they actually feel more comfortable with the health kinesiology. I think it partly depends on the practitioner that you get used to as well. But they are very different.
I found it really interesting when I was doing some research a few years ago into it, and I saw that there's a particular school that trains it with creativity, so to enable people to become more creative and explore all their avenue with it.
Yeah, I think there's schools such as classical kinesiology. I think there's a school called 3-in-1. there's Touch for Health.
Yeah.
They've all got the person at the heart of it, but I think it's, I suppose, similar to the way that religions get devolved and diversified, is that people have particular views, or they get drawn to one element of it more than the other. So, you know, sometimes people get more interested in the nutrition side, and then they go on to learn far more about the chemical components of the food that we're eating and the reactions in the body. For me, as soon as I get through the first paragraph of that, I just can't follow. My mind doesn't work in that way. Other people feel more drawn towards people's emotional health and look at more ways of involving the emotions with getting well or ridding themselves of the disease. And other people follow the Reiki and the other energy pathways that we can't see. And it just depends on your own particular interest. For me, why I love kinesiology is because you're able to use all of the elements together rather than having to specialise in any. And for me, that's what makes it really special.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so it's fascinating with its blend of traditional Chinese medicine and the Western techniques. It's fascinating how it's mixing those meridians in and how you work with them.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, I mean, obviously acupuncturists work with meridians and the Chinese 5-element system, which we work with in kinesiology. And the Chinese 5-element system is absolutely fascinating. But rather than using needles to stick in people to stimulate the qi, we just hold the points. I suppose you could say it's acupressure. We hold certain acupuncture points that are proved to be helpful in stimulating these particular energy pathways, or we trace the meridian pathway to stimulate and remove any perceived blockages. So we're not using needles. But within the Chinese 5-element system, it's fascinating because you can really go into depth and look at the colours that are relevant to each of the elements and the emotions that are relevant to each of the emotions. So, for example, I could be testing the psoas muscle, which is in the hip area, and that relates to the kidney meridian. And the kidney meridian can relate to fear and anxiety. Not always, but it can relate to fear and anxiety. So you can be helping a client who's had a long-standing problem in an area and can't quite get to grips with it, and it can be really helpful to know which particular colours and emotions are associated to that meridian circuit, because you can then maybe prompt with questions that relate to that particular emotion. Again, grief on the large intestine and the lung meridian, that comes under the metal element, which relates to grief. So it doesn't have to be necessarily bereavement grief. It can be grief in its widest sense. So is anybody being a bit of a pain at the moment? Is anybody giving you grief? Are you giving someone else grief? And it just enables you to talk, sometimes in metaphors, just to help bring out, because, the mind squirrels away things that it doesn't want to face necessarily, and so it just helps somebody sometimes think, oh, well, actually, yeah, maybe that's relevant. I hadn't thought of it that way. So, you're not digging around trying to repeat the stress necessarily, but it's important to find out what it is that's affecting the muscle circuit.
And then what would you do so for instance, one of the 5 elements was actually really strong, so for instance that water element. What would you specifically do with a client? Could you just kind of run through something?
Okay, yeah, sure. So when a new client comes to me, obviously the first thing they do is complete a health questionnaire, which enables me to look at their lifestyle. So what they're eating, what they're doing, what kind of job they've got, what physical ailments they suffer from, and why they're coming to see me. Because as much, I think you get very zealous, particularly when you first start out and somebody tells you what they want, and you think, oh yeah, that's great, but I bet it's not that, I bet it's this, that and the other, and you go delving into other areas that you think are relevant, and actually all they've come to you is because they've got a sore elbow, and you're off talking about their bowels or something, which doesn't exactly endear them to come back to you. So you go through the questionnaire, find out what their lifestyle's like, what they're eating, and then we just lay them on the couch. There's no need to. I don't ask my clients to undress necessarily. There are some practitioners who do because they prefer to work directly on the skin, but with my clients I don't. So lay down, and then we just go through a series of tests. So each muscle circuit follows a particular order, which is called a wheel balance. You don't have to work in that way, but I do find it quite helpful and comforting to clients initially that they know the format that I'm going to follow, and then you can kind of deviate from that once they become regular clients, hopefully. So we follow this particular order where you're just testing muscles in rotation, and then when you find a muscle that's weak, the next question that you want to consider is, well, is this weak because it needs to be treated, or is it weak because of something else? And I can spend some time correcting and strengthening this weak muscle, but it might actually be that I'll be wasting my time because there's something else that needs doing first. So we're challenging the body to ask, is this a priority? And then if it's a priority, we will find out what will help to fix it. And if it's not, we move on until we find a muscle that is a priority to fix. And what can then happen is that you can go back to the muscles that were previously weak and not priority. And A, they've either strengthened, or B, they then become a priority and say, yes, I'm ready now. So once you've got your weak muscle that's a priority to fix, you're considering the circuit, the meridian circuit that it's on. So, for example, if it's the one of the pec muscles that relates to the stomach, and somebody has come to you for digestion and bloating problems, that's quite nice and straightforward. You think, okay, that makes sense. And then you can look for food supplements that might be able to support the digestion or the stomach area. You can also ask them to think about emotions that might be relevant to the stomach area or anything that's going on in their life. You don't necessarily have to link it to a 5 elements, and see whether it changes the muscle response, which is quite educational for the client because it shows them, oh, this muscle's weak, but when I think of this, it goes strong. So it kind of educates people as to how their emotions affect what's going on in their body, because for some people that is completely alien. They just don't see that could be relevant. And so we find the supplement, we find some emotion, and then on a physical level, what we're doing to strengthen the muscle is to massage quite firmly the lymphatic points that relate to that particular muscle circuit.
Okay.
So the lymphatic points in the body don't always bear any geographic relation to where the muscle is. And then you stimulate that lymphatic point, which, the lymph feeds and cleans the cells that relate to the muscles. And there's points on the front of the body and points on the back of the body. So you can stimulate those, which can be quite painful.
Yeah.
You can trace the meridian circuit, you can hold some acupuncture points, you can talk to them about the stress that they've found is relevant to that particular circuit. Then you take the supplement away and retest the muscle and check that you've done enough. And with kinesiology, the treatment will always work, or the work you do will always work, provided it's relevant. So 9 times out of 10, you find that the muscle has strengthened. Clients are amazed, and then you move on. So we retest the muscle. Hopefully, 9 times out of 10, it's strengthened. If it hasn't, it's not because the kinesiology hasn't worked. It's because there's something that's been missed that is relevant to do. So it could be an additional lymphatic point, or the meridian hasn't been traced thoroughly, or there's another emotion, or the client hasn't had a clear mind while you're testing them, so they're thinking of something else which is actually affecting it. So you then move on, and then you find the next weak muscle and you do the same thing. And then ideally what you come up with at the end of the treatment are either some batch flower remedies which will help to work on the emotions, or you will find some supplements that would maybe be helpful for them. I personally don't like giving too many. Well, it depends on the individual if they're happy to take supplements, but for some people it can be quite a challenge, so it's pointless them buying a whole range of supplements that they're then not going to take. So we need to kind of work with an individual and find out what their lifestyle's like, if it supports them, if they're able to be disciplined enough to take the supplements at the times that they need to take them. And we can we can also find out if there's any foods or products that they're using that affects the muscle. So at the end of a treatment, when ideally all the muscles are testing are strong and they're balanced, then we can maybe look at some foods. There's a couple of red flags that apply to most people, such as wheat and dairy. So you can, but not for everybody. Coffee, caffeine, salt, sugar, they're the usual baddies. But you can find some quite interesting foods that are affecting people that they would never have really considered, such as bananas or tomatoes or rice, I find comes up for people quite often. And in today's lifestyle, where people are being encouraged to have sort of gluten-free diets, and there's a lot of gluten-free products, a lot of the gluten-free products that are on the market use rice flour. So if somebody is sensitive to rice and it's rice that's causing the issue and not wheat, they are actually exacerbating their problem without knowing. There's lots of sugar-free drinks on the market, or no added sugar, but they've got aspartame or other such chemicals that don't necessarily suit them. So we can then place that in the circuit to see whether it turns the muscle off, so the strong muscle then goes weak, which shows that in this particular instance, that particular product is not doing them any good. And the same for skin products, toothpaste, washing powders, cat fur, cleaning products, anything.
Could
really
be anything, can't it?
Be anything. And sometimes you strike lucky, and a couple of appointments, and they're 90%, 100% better. And other times it's a bit more of a challenge, and you have to kind of really try to unpack what's going on and what could be affecting them.
I remember years ago, and I did find this absolutely fascinating, was the kinesiologist I worked with. She was actually a naturopath who did kinesiology as well. She actually put words on my body. So she was, as she was listening to me, she wrote lots and lots of words down, then she ripped them out and placed them on my body one by one by one. And I found that absolutely fascinating. Do you find that you have to get people to bring the substances, or can you actually do that?
I don't do that. There are kinesiologists I know who do that, and they're comfortable with it. And I think it's down to your own limitations and your own belief, if you like, in the approach that you're using. For me, I prefer a slightly more grounded approach that I can understand how and why it's working. I don't have anything against that, not at all. And I suppose in an extreme situation I may well do that. But for me, I would struggle to explain it to the client, whereas I do like to, whatever I'm doing, I like to be able to explain as far as I can how and why I believe it's working. Now, obviously those words have got some kind of energy imprint on them, which is affecting them. There's so much we don't understand. But yes, I do ask that I try to get clients to complete their health questionnaire beforehand, so I've got a chance to read it through. And then if there is anything unusual that I think actually they seem to be having a lot of this, or they're taking a particular supplement, I do like them to bring those in so I can test the actual product. And for new clients, I think it's much easier to understand if you've got an apple or a particular brand of bread, because it's not just down to the generic product. Sometimes it can be brand differences that can make such an impact on them. So to actually test specifically what they're eating or what they're using or drinking, I find much more helpful and solid. But there are homeopathic test kits that you can buy that have got the energetic imprint of the particular food.
Okay.
And yes, in extreme situations, if, for example, it was Diet Coke and you didn't have any Diet Coke to hand, although I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, that's not an ideal thing for people to be drinking anyway. you could sort of say, well, okay, think about the Diet Coke, think about the taste, etc., and then muscle test it. Yeah. But to some degree, you are then muscle testing their view of that product.
Yeah.
You're muscle testing their thoughts about the Diet Coke. But on the whole, if it then would change the indicator muscle and make it go weak, you could kind of think, well, on some level it's not doing you good and you'd be better off without it. So I tend to prefer to get the clients to bring little samples of food they're eating regularly, not everything. And within my clinic, I've got staple foods such as flour, sugar, salt, rice, couscous, Marmite, things that don't go off. I've actually got sample pots of those, but I don't keep fresh products because I'd have to keep constantly replacing them. And I prefer clients to bring their own because, as I say, brand is actually very important. And we don't necessarily do all that on the first appointment. You can't do everything for somebody in one go. Sometimes we might look at everything, and then the next time, within the next appointment, I say, okay, so, the next layer of the onion that we're working on, so to speak, I'll get you to bring in and we'll see what's happening with this. Everybody's different.
And it's interesting. I want to pick up on 2 points there, really. One about their thoughts. Their thoughts really do matter whilst you're actually working on them, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Emotions are so important. I would say there's always going to be an emotion that is relevant to every fix. It's not necessarily going to be the priority, but there is always, even if it's a physical problem, even if somebody's strained their elbow or they've got tennis elbow, which I've suffered from myself in the last few months, or they've fallen over and they've got a bruise, even connected with what they were doing, there will be a thought connected with when they fell over that is then going to affect and impact their recovery. The emotions are so important. And what I find with people with longer term illnesses that are harder to quantify, such as ME, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, which are really a cluster of symptoms. They're not a disease as such. They're very real, but it can be quite challenging because the longer often somebody has suffered with pain, the more the mind almost accepts that that's just the way it will be. So someone's attitude towards their health and whether they truly believe they can get better absolutely does affect the rate of the recovery. And what can be really interesting, and again, I wouldn't necessarily do this in a first appointment, and it really depends on the individual, is to challenge their own beliefs about what they've got and challenge their own beliefs about whether they actually want to be rid of that problem. And that can actually get quite fascinating. But what you don't want to do is accuse somebody of lying. And if in the first appointment you're saying to them, oh, well, you think you want to get well, but your subconscious is saying you don't, and why is that? They're probably not going to come back because that can be, quite insulting. But beliefs about yourself and the world around you are so relevant to all of us, to all of our physical ailments and how we express ourselves. They're really, really important. And that's why it's important for clients to come back for regular or for more than one treatment. It's not a magic wand approach. And it really depends how long something's been going on as to how long and how often they need to come back.
And your point about the fact that, consciously they've arrived and they may want to get well, unconsciously the reasons why they don't get well are really very fascinating, and it's that unlayering process that can take the time.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the easiest analogies is, if you think about weight loss, the whole expression weight loss is you're losing something. And the subconscious mind, if you lose something, will always try to get it back. So you get this cycle of losing weight and then gaining it again. There's also can be a subconscious reason that people are holding on to weight for protection, although they don't realise that. Or it can be something as simple as, well, if I lose weight, then I'm going to have to change my whole wardrobe of clothes and I haven't got the money. So, and how you phrase the thought, the way you go about it is to, first of all, test your indicator muscle to see the strength of it. And then to get them to say a statement such as, I want to lose weight, or I want to give up smoking, or I want to be free of my phobia of flying. And then you see whether and if the muscle stays strong, then you can assume that the subconscious is happy with that statement. But if the muscle goes weak, then you need to find out why the subconscious isn't happy with the statement, I want to lose weight. Or it may be strong on I want to lose weight, but then if you ask them to say, I deserve to lose weight, a lot of people feel they don't deserve anything. Or, and there's all sorts of guilt and stuff wrapped up within that. So then you have to find a way of challenging those beliefs and supporting them. I use batch flower remedies a lot because I think they're really helpful. You can help them without necessarily having to think about it all day and tapping each meridian. You can just take, you can take these mixtures of batch flowers and then maybe using some affirmations about how you deserve, or try to understand why you think you don't deserve it. And it does become absolutely fascinating.
And that language that people use is really interesting, isn't it? Because you can be talking about one thing, but the whole, like you say, the deserving, the accepting, the forgiving, that language can make such a fundamental difference.
Yeah, and it's really important when you're treating someone to listen to the language they're using, or some little snippet that comes out they haven't told you. And obviously, within the questionnaire, there's only so much that people complete. Food's the interesting one. You ask people what they eat. I mean, you may find this. You ask people what they eat and they instantly tell you what they don't eat. So, it'd be like, what's your regime for the... Well, I don't eat wheat. And someone took me off, bread or something. And it can be quite challenging to actually find out, well, what are you eating? And even if the main things are put down, like breakfast, lunch and dinner, it can be like 3 appointments later that you find out every day they're eating licorice, or every day at 3 o'clock they're having a sticky bun, or, we all do it. We kind of conveniently forget some of the things that we eat. So you do have to listen to, yes, the language and the phrasing that they use and the stuff they tell you during the treatment, rather than just relying on what's been declared during the form, because obviously they have to get to know you as well.
The in-between meals is fascinating sometimes, when I sometimes get clients who seem to have the perfect diet, and then as you delve and delve, suddenly all of the snacks come out.
Yeah. I think it kind of helps not being perfect yourself. I mean, I'm far from having a perfect diet or weight or size or whatever. I've given up the idea that I can never be perfect. So I think to some degree, actually, it kind of helps you think, well, this can't be true. I'm not like that, and I don't. So I think it can be quite helpful sometimes not being perfect. Although, you do have to practice what you preach, really. Otherwise, you think, why am I coming to this person?
But I've realised over the years that mindset plays the highest part in health. The physical side, in regards to putting diet in and taking supplements and making sure you're hydrated, are almost the easy things to do. It's the mindset side that actually is one of the biggest mountains that people have to climb. But once and myself, once I've started to master that, the difference that I've experienced, and I'll just personally, just from personal experience, has been phenomenal in my health. And at one stage I had health on a plate and actually was still extremely ill. And this is where I started to realise that your mindset and your unconscious mind plays by far the biggest part, and is by far the biggest factor in health and well-being.
Absolutely. And sometimes there can be really huge challenges for people that they're just not willing to address, or not able, or just don't want to. And sometimes, it's not for me as a practitioner to say, well, you've got to do this, that, and the other. I would never do that. But sometimes you do think, well, until this is addressed, then your health will always be a challenge. I don't like the phrase "you'll never get well."
Yeah.
I think the health will always be a challenge if you're not able to address this particular situation. But sometimes there are situations that people can't get out of for whatever reason. And I think if you can't change the situation, what you can maybe help them do is change their glasses, change their prescription for their spectacles, change the way they look at it. And there's a very powerful technique we use called emotional stress relief.
Okay.
Which is just a very, very simple technique of contacting specific points on the forehead that stimulate an area of the brain that relates to problem solving. And using these points and the technique and just thinking about the issue just really it's deceptively simple. There is a bit more to it than that, but it can take a huge layer of stress off the body. And so it enables people just to find a different way of looking at it. So, you could think maybe, well, there is this situation or this person or somebody's behaviour that is upsetting me. I can't do anything about it, but I don't have to let it affect me. But it's not, you can talk to people, you can say that to people till you're blue in the face, but they need to come up with the solution and the language that's right for them. It's like with affirmations. You could say to people, right, I want you to tap this point and say every day, I deserve to lose weight. But if that doesn't feel right, if it doesn't resonate with them, it's pointless saying it. So they've got to come up with a phrase that helps them, such as, I deserve to be 3 stone lighter, or I deserve to shed this weight. Or, it's got to be in a language and something that feels comfortable for them rather than us telling them. And it's the same with situations in their life. It's not for me to say, well, you need to sort this out. It's more a case of them coming to an idea or realisation, or just a way of slightly changing how they think about it. And that can be enormously helpful as well. It's a great privilege to work with people. And you find parallels with your own life sometimes, which can be interesting too.
Yeah, when you start to learn from your own clients' experiences, fascinating.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got someone in front of you telling you something that you've actually just either gone through or you're going through, and all of a sudden you're thinking, gosh.
Yeah, or you find yourself saying things to them and you think, actually, this is me telling me this, not me telling you that.
I once had a client turn up, and the whole session, they were hugely experienced in what they did, hugely experienced, had no real need to be here, and I spent the whole session, and I actually didn't charge them for it because I said, 1, you have no need to be with me, but 2, I've gained far more from this session than you realise. It was almost like they came to bring a message to me, and they actually acknowledged that they couldn't understand why they'd been drawn to come, but they had to come.
How interesting.
It was truly fascinating. When they got out of the car outside the clinic, I stood up and I knew that this session was going to actually change my life in some way.
Wow.
I just had this huge feeling about it, and I didn't know who they were. And as they explained everything bit by bit, as you do, as you start to take your case history, I realised that they didn't really need me at all. They were far more experienced. They knew actually what they needed to do, but they were imparting a piece of information to me that I actually needed to complete a jigsaw, as you say, in something that I was actually finding a difficulty with myself. And I just found the whole experience fascinating.
It's amazing, isn't it? And you never know at some point in the future. It's not all about now, is it? At some point in the future, that person may feel a need to come to you, and they really do need it. And I always like to, people say to me after, if I've had a busy treatment day, say, "Oh, you must be exhausted." And I used to, when I was back in HR, having to make people who were closing branches or having to make people redundant, and a lot of them were lovely, and they say, "Oh, this must be horrible for you." And I say, "Don't worry about me. I'll have my therapy later.
Yeah.
This is all about you." And it's the same in a treatment situation. And I think the danger, you can get to know your clients and end up in a treatment talking about yourself more than you're talking about them, because you're sort of chattering away rather than concentrating on them. So that's something that you have to be aware of. But I do think I don't get tired treating people, and I do think that I gain a tiny little bit from whatever treatment I'm given. I actually gain something for myself as well, and I think that's the preferred attitude to have, because when I think when you start training, the danger is students say to me, "Oh, is it possible you can take on the effects of someone's illness that you're treating? You take it away from them and give it to yourself." And it's about attitude again. I say, if you view it that you're benefiting and you're actually gaining, whether it's an insight or whether it's just a pleasure in treating them, or you just gain some little benefit for yourself as well. So I don't necessarily feel exhausted after a day of treatment, because it's about how you approach it. Although, as we know, there are people that have a lot going on, and there are some people that potentially are more draining than others, which is why it's important to look after yourself as well.
How much of an influence do you think you have on the results as a practitioner when you're testing people?
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? There's got to be an influence, because none of us are robots, and if there's no influence, you might as well go and be tested by a machine. There are machines that can test nutritional status, and they are possibly quicker and more effective, but they're not as holistic in my view, because they're not encompassing all the emotions and everything else that's connected with that person's health. But it is a method. So yes, I think definitely you have to find the right practitioner that's right for you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the best technical skills. It's a bit about bedside manner, isn't there? You do learn to potentially use different language with different clients. I wouldn't say you behave differently towards them, but you find different language to use for different clients that will help them, or depending on their personality. If you've got an engineer laying on your table with a physical condition, you're not going to start warbling on about Chinese meridians and acupuncture points and chakra energy, whereas somebody who is more open to that may not be interested in the lymphatic massage that you're doing, or the food that they're eating. So I personally do think that there is definitely an impact on the actual practitioner that is doing the treatment, and it is important to find somebody that you are comfortable with, but also somebody who will push, because you don't want to be too comfortable. Sometimes if you need to be challenged, it's a fine balance, I think, between finding somebody who will challenge your assumptions, but in a way that you're comfortable with, as opposed to somebody being a bit more forceful. Although there are some personalities who would prefer that. I suppose it depends what you're dealing with. But yes, I do think the practitioner has an impact on how the client reacts to the treatment. Although ideally, if we all test muscles in the correct way, you should get the same response. So if I test a few muscles and they're strong or weak, someone else testing them should get the same result if they're testing it correctly and in the same way. But having said that, if there is an extreme negative response to the person you've got who's testing you, then potentially that will affect the outcome. But that's because there's an emotional component to it, as opposed to the fact that the person isn't testing the muscle correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Now, I know when I worked with Jean a few years ago. She placed magnets onto my body. What exactly is that doing? Because I never asked her at the time.
Oh, yeah, if we can use, there's a variety of ways of turning the muscle off. If we're wanting to test whether a strong muscle will go weak, we need to check that it is genuinely strong. So as well as being able to resist pressure, a muscle should also be able to turn off and relax. And there's a number of ways of testing whether a muscle is truly strong or whether it's what we call hypertonic, which is just rigid and hanging on for dear life. And one of the ways of turning off a muscle is to place the north pole of a magnet within either the belly of the muscle or the lymphatic point, and then retest the muscle while the north pole of the magnet is on the individual's muscle, and it should turn off in those circumstances. There's certain sedation points you can use within acupuncture that will also have the same effect. And likewise, although I don't do it, I suppose if you put the south pole of a magnet on a weak muscle, it should strengthen it.
Oh, interesting.
But there is something else called magnet therapy, which I know nothing about at all, and that may be what you're referring to. But the way I would use magnets is to check whether it turns a strong muscle off.
Yeah, she literally would just place it on test and then effectively remove it and then carry on with the work she was doing, which was fascinating.
Yeah, she would be checking that your strong muscle is genuinely strong and will turn off and relax, as opposed to being hypertonic, which is in a state of, you often find the muscle that relates to the adrenals is the sartorius muscle. And if somebody, you will know this, if somebody is super stressed and their adrenals are super stressed, often the muscle won't be weak, it will be hypertonic because they're in a physical state of just hanging on for dear life. They can't, when people go on holiday, they get ill.
Yeah.
They've relaxed. Well, it could be that they've come in such a state of stress that they haven't got to the relaxing point yet. And, they're just in a state of hypertonicity. So she will have just been checking that your muscle was truly strong.
It was probably that state at the time. I used to go in and see her, and basically I used to treat her like a paramedic almost, just patch me up and get me back out on the warfield so I could carry on at work.
Yeah, and often, clients, you sort of meet people and they say, oh, I'd love to come for treatment, I haven't got time. And you think, oh, you so desperately need it. And the thing is, I can see myself 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and so you can't judge or criticise because I think, oh, I've been there. And clients, oh, yeah, I'd love that. And oh, when I can fit it in. And, you can't preach and say, well, if you don't, you're just digging yourself further and you deserve it and you can't help anyone if you can't help yourself. You can say all those things, but it's pointless because they have to get to the position where they either it's critical and they've got no choice, which often happens, but they're the ones that need it most, really.
More than anything. Yeah.
No. And kinesiology isn't just about getting people well, it's about the prevention as well. So in an ideal world, you'll get somebody to a state of health they're happy with, and then they will come to you for like regular MOTs rather than waiting till something's wrong.
So what would you do in effectively an MOT situation? Because I actually agree with you. I love the Chinese approach, the Chinese medicine approach, which is where you basically you pay your Chinese medicine doctor whilst you're well, and then when you're ill, you don't pay him because actually you're meant to be well.
Yeah, I'd like that. You do the same thing. They come back, tell you what's been going on. You test. Maybe you follow the wheel balance approach or a different approach targeted at what their problems have been in the past, testing muscles that relate to the thing they've come to you about. What I tend to do is I'll just work in a wheel balance in priority order, and where there's a weakness, we'll find out why.
What are you talking about with the wheel balancing approach?
Oh, sorry, the muscles that follow the order of the Chinese 5-element system.
Okay.
So they go round in a specific order. So it goes from stomach to spleen and so on and so forth. And it's just a particular, you don't have to follow that sequence, but it just gives you a format, if you like, so you don't get lost and think, oh, have I tested that? Or it just gives you an approach, a system to follow.
Linda, this has been really, really fascinating talking to you about a subject matter that I've known but a basic amount about, but not in this much detail. Would you like to give your contact details and your website out so that if people who want to actually pursue this in more detail or want to actually talk to you about going on a course and learning it for themselves, how they get in contact with you?
Oh, yes, please. The website is lindabelcherhealthcare.co.uk. There is a contact form on the website, or you can email info@lindabelcherhealthcare.co.uk. My phone number is, again, on the website, but it's 07787 194 337. I do other treatments as well. I tend to combine the treatment sometimes with reflexology or Reiki and so on. And I'd be delighted to speak to anybody who wants either a treatment or, as you say, would actually like to learn it for themselves. I do workshops and I run a fully certificated foundation course that's accredited by the Association of Systematic Kinesiology. So I'd love to speak to anybody, even if they're just interested. Please do contact me.
Linda, this has been really lovely talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on Food for Thought.
Thank you.